So I want you to just completely forget the balcony for a second. Forget the poetry, the stolen glances, and, that whole pop culture image of two star-crossed teenagers whispering in the dark.
Yeah, that image is frankly super misleading.
Right. I mean, if you actually look at the first page of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, you aren't greeted with a romance at all. You are thrown headfirst into this brutal, sweltering street war.
Absolutely, it's a riot.
Exactly, a riot. Where the local youth are biting their thumbs, they're drawing steel, and actively trying to butcher each other in the town square.
It really is a masterclass in systemic violence. Like, the play doesn't open with love. It establishes a world where aggression is just the absolute baseline of human interaction.
And that happens long before we even meet the title character.
I'll eat before. Yeah.
So that is our mission for today's Deep Dives. We're looking at a massive stack of sources. We've got advanced study guides, examiner memorandums, and, of course, original text excerpts.
The good stuff.
The good stuff, right. And we want to help you build a top-tier critical literature essay out of this. Specifically, we want to give you the analytical tools to argue that human avoidable violence, rather than some, mystical predetermined fate, is the true engine driving the tragedy of this play.
And honestly, it's the most compelling angle a student can take.
Because it's different.
Well, yeah, because it forces you to look past the superficial romance. Like, when you argue that violence is the catalyst, you have to examine the societal machinery of Verona.
Right.
You start analyzing the text not as a love story that went wrong, but as a study of a society that was so deathly toxic it made survival impossible for anyone who deviated from its code.
I love that. And I want to dive straight into that societal machinery, specifically how the text constructs this environment. The sources we have, they highlight this phrase, cankered hate, to describe the feud between the Montagues and the Capulets.
Oh, that is such a great phrase.
It does so much heavy lifting because, it's not just anger. A canker's a rot. It's a disease that starts at the root and just infects the entire organism.
Precisely. And Shakespeare proves how deep that infection goes right in Act 1, Scene 1. He doesn't show us the lords of the houses fighting initially.
Right. It's not the rich guys in charge.
No, he shows us the servants, Samson and Gregory. So the rot has trickled all the way down the socioeconomic ladder.
It's everywhere.
It's absolutely everywhere. These two are pacing the streets, boasting about acts of extreme violence and sexual assault, and they use this highly evocative, deeply unsettling phrase, which is naked weapon.
Ugh, yeah. Which immediately sets up the entire semiotics of the play.
It really does.
Because you have naked, a word inherently tied to, vulnerability, intimacy, sexual desire, and it's just violently slammed against weapon.
Yes.
It shows how completely intertwined dominance and intimacy have become in this culture.
The juxtaposition there is brilliant, but it's also horrifying. Like, by putting those two concepts together in the mouths of the lower-class citizens, Shakespeare is showing us that in Verona, masculinity is entirely defined by conquest.
Regardless of what kind of conquest.
Exactly. Whether that conquest is sexual or homicidal, it almost doesn't matter to them. The language of love has been totally corrupted by the language of war.
You cannot have one without the other bleeding in.
Right.
But, it isn't a lawless society on paper. Prince Aeschylus exists. The government exists.
He does, yeah. He tries anyway.
He steps in and explicitly warns both families that if they disturb the streets again, their lives will pay the forfeit of the peace. So, the rule of law is threatening them with literal capital punishment.
Which should be a pretty big deterrent.
You would think.
Yeah.
But what I find fascinating is how entirely ineffective that threat is.
Well, it's ineffective because the rule of law is competing with the rule of honor. And in Renaissance vendetta culture, the social currency of honor is vastly more important than the legal currency of the state.
I was reading through the historical context notes in the study guides, and it made me think of a highly structured, almost dystopian gang war.
Oh, that's a really good analogy.
Right. Like, in those environments, your street cred, your family name, your colors, that is your entire identity.
It's everything you are.
So if the government tells you to stand down, but your rival insults you in public, walking away doesn't just mean you lose face.
No, it means you lose your identity.
Exactly. Your protection, your standing as a man. Social death is a far more terrifying prospect to these characters than actual death.
That is a perfect framework for the essay. It's what we call the honor trap.
The honor trap. I like that.
Yeah, the societal expectation of hypermasculine retaliation is basically a structural cage. To exist as a prominent male in Verona is to be weaponized at all times.
You have to be ready to commit murder over a perceived slight.
just to maintain your social equilibrium. Making the peaceful choice isn't just difficult, it requires a level of psychological rebellion that is virtually unthinkable in their world.
Okay, let's unpack this because that brings us to the ultimate enforcer of that toxic code, which is Mercutio.
Oh, Mercutio.
Yeah, I think pop culture has done a massive disservice to Mercutio by flattening him into, like, the quirky, funny best friend.
Well, completely. It's a very shallow reading of him.
When you actually analyze the text and the sources we have, he is arguably the most aggressively cynical and dangerous character in the play when it comes to enforcing this honor trap.
He operates as the immune system of Verona's toxic culture. He aggressively attacks anything that looks like vulnerability or emotional sincerity.
Why is he so toxic when it comes to love and peace, though?
Well, look at the textual evidence regarding his philosophy on love.
Yeah.
In Act 1, Scene 4, when Romeo is agonizing over his feelings, Mercutio's advice is literally, if love be rough with you, be rough with love. Prick love for pricking, and you beat love down.
The violence in the phonetics right there is staggering.
It is. It actually requires the actor to weaponize their own mouth.
What do you mean?
Well, the plosive lexis, the repetition of those harsh P and B sounds in prick, pricking, beat, it turns the dialogue into a physical assault. When you deliver those lines, the consonants require a small explosion of air.
So it actually sounds like striking blows.
Exactly.
Wow. And he's using these violent phallic verbs to completely dismantle the idea of romantic love, which reduces it back to that naked weapon concept we talked about.
It's purely physical, it's sexual and combative. He just cannot comprehend a version of love that involves yielding or emotional surrender.
Because yielding is submitting.
Right. And to Mercutio, submission is the ultimate violation of the masculine code. This fixation on dominance is what makes his reaction to Romeo's pacifism later in the play so explosive.
Let's look at that pivotal moment, actually, in Act 3, Scene 1. It's sweltering hot. Tybalt is prowling the streets looking for blood. But Romeo, having just secretly married Juliet, is now technically Tybalt's family.
Right, which Tybalt obviously doesn't know.
He has no idea. So Romeo attempts the unthinkable in Verona. He tries to de-escalate. He offers love. He actively refuses to draw his sword.
And Mercutio's reaction isn't just anger, it is profound, visceral disgust.
He views Romeo's refusal to fight as a grotesque betrayal.
Yes, he literally calls Romeo effeminate, explicitly stripping him of his gender status, and then he delivers that scathing condemnation. Oh, calm, dishonorable, vile submission.
That line is structurally brilliant. The tricolon there acts like a descending staircase into total contempt.
It really does. He builds a lexicon of fragility,
Yeah.
taking a word like calm, which in any healthy society would be a virtue, right? It's the exact thing Prince Aeschylus is begging for.
Yeah, please be calm.
Exactly. But he sandwiches it between dishonorable and vile. Mercutio is rewriting the moral vocabulary.
To him, preserving peace is a moral failing.
He is so deeply institutionalized by the feud that he would rather die, and he would rather see his best friend die than see a Montague walk away from an insult.
Which is exactly the catalyst that sets the tragedy in motion, because Mercutio simply cannot tolerate the submission, so he draws his own sword to fight Tybalt in Romeo's place.
Right.
Romeo desperately tries to physically break it up, stepping between them, and Tybalt takes the cheap shot under Romeo's arm, fatally wounding Mercutio.
It is the hinge upon which the entire play swings.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it produces some of the most analyzed dying words in the English language. I mean, a plague of both your houses, they have made worm's meat of me.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, for a student writing an essay on violence versus fate, this quote is the golden ticket.
Really? How so?
Look at the euphemism worm's meat. He doesn't say, they have killed me, or I am dying for honor.
Oh, right.
He reduces his own corpse to literal bait. It completely demystifies the violence. It strips away all the shiny, heroic veneer of the vendetta and exposes the brutal, grotesque reality of their culture.
Yeah, there is no poetry in being worm's meat. But what strikes me even more is the first half of the line. A plague of both your houses.
The curse.
Yeah. This is the guy who has been enforcing the Montague honor code for the entire play. And in his final breath, he realizes it was all a lie. He doesn't curse the stars. He doesn't blame the gods or destiny.
No, he squarely blames the human institutions, both houses, for his murder.
He recognizes the systemic rot. The cankered hate has finally killed him.
He understands that his death isn't some tragic twist of fate. It is the mathematical guarantee of the culture they all perpetuated.
But this is where I want to push back on the sequence of events a little bit, or at least dissect Romeo's psychology here.
Okay, go for it.
Because a modern audience watches Mercutio die, They hear him condemn the feud, and they think, okay, Romeo sees the pointless horror of this. He's going to grab Juliet and flee.
Right, that would be the logical modern response.
But Romeo does the exact opposite. Why does he pivot back into the violence he was just trying to escape?
Well, because escaping it requires a lifetime of unlearning. And Romeo has about 3 seconds to process the trauma of his best friend's murder.
That's a really good point.
The tragedy requires Romeo to succumb to the very environment he was trying to transcend. The textual shift is incredibly stark. Romeo stands over the body and says, "Away to heaven, respective lenity, and fire-eyed fury be my conduct now."
Here's where it gets really interesting, because he explicitly banishes his own gentleness.
Yes.
Respective lenity, his thoughtfulness, his humanity. He literally tells it to leave his body so that rage can take the wheel.
He is consciously choosing to re-assimilate into the violent code of Verona. The fire-eyed fury is the required state of being for a man in this culture who has just suffered a loss.
So he stops being the lover.
And reverts back to the Montague soldier. He hunts down Tybalt and slaughters him in the street.
So is this the definitive point of no return? Like, is the play a romance up until this sword thrust and a tragedy the second after?
Absolutely. The structure of the narrative demands it. I mean, think about it. Before Tybalt's death, there were still avenues for a peaceful resolution.
Like what?
Well, if Romeo maintains his lenity, the prince likely executes Tybalt for the unprovoked murder of Mercutio, who, remember, is the prince's own kinsman.
Oh, right. So the law would have handled it.
Exactly. Romeo's hands are clean. And then the secret marriage to Juliet could eventually be leveraged as a diplomatic bridge between the grieving houses.
But the moment Romeo chooses retribution over the law, he burns the bridge.
He seals his own doom. The murder of Tybalt forces the prince to banish Romeo. The banishment removes Romeo from the city, leaving Juliet utterly isolated when her father forcefully accelerates her marriage to Paris.
And then that isolation drives her to the friar's desperate potion plot,
which relies on a fragile communication network that fails, resulting in Romeo finding her comatose, believing she is dead, and consuming the poison.
It's just a relentless chain reaction.
A chain reaction triggered entirely by one human being choosing fire-eyed fury over respective lenity. The deaths in the tomb are simply the final, inevitable symptoms of that specific choice in Act 3.
All right, let's synthesize this for you listening right now. Say you're sitting at your desk, staring at a blank document, trying to construct a cohesive argument that doesn't just list plot points, but actually demonstrates critical literary analysis.
The hardest parts.
Right. How do we structure this argument logically?
So the most sophisticated essays often rely on a clear dialectical structure. You establish a progression of thought. Start by analyzing the environment as the pressure cooker.
Okay.
You use the opening scene, that naked weapon quote we talked about, to prove that violence is the default setting of Verona. Establish that these characters are operating in a society where intimacy is corrupted by aggression right from the ground up.
So you basically establish the rules of the world first.
Exactly.
Then, for the second phase of the essay, do you focus on how those rules are aggressively enforced?
Yes, you analyze the enforcers. This is where you bring in Tybalt and Mercutio. You dissect Mercutio's plosive language and his tricolon mocking Romeo's submission.
The calm, dishonorable, vile submission.
That's the one. You demonstrate how the toxic masculine code aggressively polices behavior, making peace socially impossible and setting the stage for the inevitable clash.
And that leads naturally to the climax of the argument, which is the assimilation. You track Romeo's failed attempt to rise above the culture, his trauma at Mercutio's death, and his fatal pivot back into the system.
Spot on. You use the quote about throwing away his lenity to prove that his choice to participate in the cycle of revenge is the singular mechanism that triggers the banishment and the lover's ultimate doom.
That structure provides a brilliant, cohesive arc. I mean, it moves from the macro society down to the micropsychology of the protagonist.
It really does.
But, and this is the big but, I see a massive trap here for a student.
Oh, what's that?
If you write 3,000 words arguing that it's entirely about human violence and choices, the examiner is going to penalize you for ignoring one of the most famous structural elements of the entire play, which is the prologue.
Ah, yes, the prologue.
I mean, the chorus walks out on stage before anyone even speaks and calls them star-crossed lovers. That implies destiny. And Shakespeare intentionally structures that prologue as a strict sonnet.
Which is a tightly controlled, highly regulated poetic form.
Right. The 14 lines, the specific rhyme scheme, the iambic pentameter. It literally boxes the characters into an inescapable structure before the first sword is even drawn. So how does a student argue for human agency and violence without completely ignoring the text's explicit framing of fatalism?
That is a great point, and this is exactly where you elevate your essay from good to exceptional.
Okay, I'm listening.
You don't ignore the fate argument, you synthesize it. You acknowledge the fatalistic framework of the sonnet and the star-crossed label, but you argue that the vehicle fate uses to destroy them is the human violence of their society.
Ah, so fate is the blueprint, but human violence provides the bricks and mortar.
Precisely. And the textual key to unlocking this synthesis is Shakespeare's use of oxymorons. Look at Friar Lawrence. When he is warning Romeo about the sudden, intense marriage, he says, "These violent delights have violent ends."
Violent delights.
Yeah.
The purest emotion they have, their delight in each other, is structurally bound to the violence of their world.
Yes. The oxymoron proves that they cannot exist separately. So you argue in your essay that yes, they may have been fated to meet and fated to die, but it is the toxic environment and their own complicity in its violent codes that acts as the mechanism of that fate.
The stars put them in the arena, but the human culture of vendetta handed them the swords.
That is exactly it. It shows the examiner you aren't just picking one side of the prompt, you're looking at how the two themes intersect.
You are acknowledging the macro structure of destiny while proving that the micro decisions of human aggression are what actually execute the tragedy.
It demonstrates a very mature grasp of literary mechanics.
So, bringing this out of the 16th century and into the present, why does dissecting the mechanics of Verona's violence matter to someone listening today? Obviously, you and I aren't settling family disputes with rapiers in the town square.
Well, we aren't, but the psychological architecture of Verona is incredibly modern.
How so?
Think about the pressure to conform to deeply toxic societal codes. That is universal. The terror of losing your social standing or your identity within a group if you refuse to participate in their collective hatreds.
The danger of the echo chamber.
Exactly. Mercutio and Tybalt are basically human echo chambers. They are constantly reinforcing the most extreme aggressive responses to any given situation.
And we see that every day. We see the pressure to prioritize ego, pride, and, performative outrage over actual resolution.
And most tragically, we see the danger of making irreversible, emotionally charged decisions in the heat of trauma or anger. Romeo's pivot, throwing away his thoughtful lenity for fire-eyed fury, is a uniquely human failing.
The play forces us to look at the catastrophic fallout of that specific instantaneous choice.
It really does.
Which actually brings up a really thorny philosophical question to close this out. If we look at how deeply ingrained this culture of violence is, if it starts with the servants and infects every single interaction in the city, did Romeo ever truly stand a chance?
That is the ultimate question to mull over as you draft your conclusion.
Because we judge him for abandoning his peace and killing Tybalt. But if you were raised in a pressure cooker, where your masculinity, your honor, and your family's survival are entirely dependent on answering violence with violence, did Romeo actually exercise free will when he drew his sword?
Was it a choice, or was it a reflex installed by a broken society?
Or was his psychological conditioning so absolute that Verona had already made that choice for him the very second he was born a Montague? It's definitely something to wrestle with as you piece your arguments together. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Good luck structuring those essays, trust the text, and we will catch you next time.